Hello, everybody. It is a crossover edition of the Locked On Big 12 and Locked On SEC podcast. My name is Josh Neighbors, host of Locked On Big 12, here with Chris Gordy, the host of Locked On SEC, your championship game preview from both the Big 12 and the SEC side for all of you out there coming your way. So much to break down. And Chris, I have to start with this. We did not think it was going to be Big 12 against SEC. I think we felt like kind of and we'll see if it turns out to be true, but maybe the de facto championship game was UGA against Ohio State. Turned out to be an instant classic. But I think we kind of felt like we get the rematch of last year's semifinal with Georgia and Michigan. Has not panned out that way. Do you think Georgia fans are happy that they're seeing TCU in the championship game? Or do you think they'd rather be playing Michigan?
Yeah, I think, if you ask any Georgia fan, they open as 2 touchdown favorites. Of course, this is the team they want to see. This is the easiest path. I do think TCU is better than maybe some fans are giving them credit for, and I do think maybe if things go right for them, they could find themselves in this game. But yeah, I think just on the surface, Georgia Bulldogs fans are looking at this game going, easy path, one hand tied behind our back, we can beat TCU. And it's been interesting, that line, our friends at BetOnline, I think opened right around 13.5. And I think it's already gone down to about 12.5. It's starting to move. The money's starting to move. People are going, it's a lot of points to give Georgia. So, the bigger thing to me, Josh, is I was just so happy we finally got two competitive semifinal games, because since the start of the playoff, the semifinal games have largely been blowouts. I mean, Bama, Kansas State the other night, that was basically how the semifinals have been playing out. It was good to see two highly competitive games that both games came down to the wire. And, you said Georgia, Ohio State was the de facto championship. I mean, TCU, Michigan was a hell of a game down to the end. So, yeah, I think I was just so pleased that we finally got two games like that. But to answer your question, yeah, I think Georgia fans are ecstatic they got TCU. But I would just say, word of caution, Bulldog fans, if you start overlooking TCU and getting a little too confident, this team has been sneaky good all year. And anytime people have counted them out, I was one of the people who said, they're going to go into Austin and Texas is going to get that monster win. And they found a way to rise to the occasion. They've done it every week, and don't count out the Horned Frogs.
Yeah, and also if you want to get action in this game, BetOnline. That is the place to go do it. They'll have first half, second half. If you guys want to go player props, they probably aren't up yet. They usually wait on those, especially though the fact that we have some injuries, which we'll get to here in a little bit. That's the place to do it. BetOnline. Chris, I want to ask you. So you cover obviously the league, and I think passing the torch in the league, it's also the passing the torch in the sport. Bama has been the dominant program. I think the question a lot of people want to know is, would they win next Monday night? Does Georgia take that mantle? Does the Padawan become the master, if you will? Does Kirby Smart take that role? Does Georgia football take that role as the new standard in the sport? Because it's not just the two championships, right? It's also, the fact that they came pretty damn close before, right? The one year obviously with Alabama, but like this is a team that has just, been really close. And obviously they won too, especially with Stetson Bennett, the quarterback. I know he's been good this year, but still they able to accomplish that. It feels like they are the ones now who are kind of the standard bearer.
Yeah, and somebody asked me earlier today, they said, if they win this, is Stetson Bennett the best quarterback in the history of Georgia? And I said, it's funny, guys like Aaron Murray have already said he's better than I ever was. I don't know if Matthew Stafford's ever come out and said anything, but how do you argue with the only guy to win 2 national championships at Georgia? It's, again, is he flashy? Do his numbers wow you? They've been very good. He was invited to the Heisman ceremony, and I just feel like people continually to discount Stetson Bennett. All he does is answers the bell and goes out there and performs. Last week when his team needed it most, he put the team on his back. They went down the field and got the go-ahead touchdown. So that's an interesting one if they win this. But you're right. Yeah, there was a shifting in the dynamic. We've become so accustomed with Nick Saban. Every year, either Saban's playing in the playoff and playing for a title, or they take a year off and then the next year they bounce back and they're in the title game and probably winning it. It's been this constant cycle for about the past decade. And now there's been a shift in the dynamic. And Kirby Smart, he played for one a couple years ago. Last year finally broke through and won it. This year he finally breaks through and wins an SEC title and in the national championship with a chance to win back-to-back. I don't know how you don't say that they are in the driver's seat and, start throwing the word dynasty around with an opportunity for Georgia to really be in the driver's seat moving forward as the dynamic, dominant program in the SEC. Now the best thing about the SEC is at times it's been cyclical. When the SEC dominance started in the early 2000s, it was LSU first breaking through, then Florida won a couple championships, then LSU won again in 07, and then Bama started in that 09, 2010, that whole run where they started playing for them. But Georgia's kind of flipped the script now, and here we are, Kirby with a chance to win back-to-back. And, it could be everyone, instead of everyone chasing Bama every year, it could be everybody chasing Kirby in Georgia.
Yeah, and he won't have the number, obviously, that close to what Nick has, but back-to-back is back-to-back, right? I mean, it's tough to argue with those kind of results. As Georgia comes into this game, I think about this team compared to last year's team. This team to me is not anywhere near as good as last year's team. I think last year's team, especially on defense, I know the numbers for them are good this year, but like that last year with the number of guys that they had that were first round, with 5 first-round picks, I believe, off that defense last year, it feels like, especially like they've been had a couple times on defense. That LSU game, I had somebody push back on this. That was a little sideways for that defense. I mean, that last drive LSU had at the end of the half, and then the next few drives they had, like 3 or 4 drives after that, they were all essentially 50-plus yard drives that either ended in touchdown. They had the one that ended in a 4th down stop, near the goal line. But this defense not quite as good. The offense, though, with Stetson is a bit more. They can be a bit more explosive, I feel like, at times. That's a difference.
The offense is better. The defense may be a step behind. Now, I will say, after the Georgia Tech game, all encompassing on the season, the defense had been basically, almost as dominant in terms of points allowed. It was them in Illinois right at the top in terms of least.
But did you feel like watching it eye test wise that they terrified you as much as last year's defense did?
No, because they were missing pieces, right? I mean, all those first round picks they had a year ago, and then they lose Nolan Smith midway through the season. I mean, they lost guys, but they've had dudes step up. Christopher Smith has been a monster back there. Small Munden's been, a stud linebacker everywhere. Jamin Dumas-Johnson. I mean, they've got so many pieces. Keely Ringo, I thought, had a great year until the LSU game and the Ohio State game. He was, as good as it gets in that secondary. Malachi Starks, a stud freshman, in the secondary. So they've got some pieces, but you're right. I said it after the LSU game, that second half where Garrett Nussmeier, the backup, comes in the SEC championship game and starts torching the Georgia secondary. I said, man, CJ Stroud is watching this, taking notes, going, we got something here. We're going to put up some points on Georgia. And they absolutely did. And I know Sonny Dykes and Max Duggan are sitting there going, look, they're looking at their offensive line right now going, if you guys give us time, if you can hold back big bad Jalen Carter and open up some running lanes and then give us that pass protection, there's some plays to be had here because we know how good TCU's receiving core is. And so, I think TCU's, and we'll get to, keys to a victory, but I think their path here is making it a shootout like it was against Michigan, like Ohio State had last week against Georgia.
And then injury-wise, where are we with the Dogs? I know they were pretty banged up actually coming out of that game. It feels like in terms of where they want to be and where they were. I know they had some injuries going into it, but it sounds like they're a little bit banged up.
The biggest ones, Warren McClendon has been banged up, the offensive lineman, and every week Kirby's saying we're hopeful to get him back, and then we don't see him. Darnell Washington, the tight end, they have the 2 best tight end combo between Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington. Washington got hurt this past week and left the game, and my thought was watching him limp around. I'm like, there's no way he plays on Monday. Well, then it came out that it was a little more soft tissue, and that there is a chance for him to play on Monday. So that's
significant if he plays. It's a big difference.
Yeah. Oh, him and Brock Bowers are just matchup nightmares. They were 2 big body physical tight ends that are just impossible to cover. You put a corner on them, you put a slow linebacker on them, it's just impossible to cover them. And then Chaz Chambliss, the outside linebacker, again, it sounds like they say they're hopeful to get all those guys back for Monday. So Kirby always holds his cards close to the vest. He'll never say a guy is absolutely out. They'll just say we're hopeful to get them all back. But sounds like there's a chance that, not all those guys play on Monday.
All right. So quick word from our sponsors here on today's show. We are brought to you all by Built Bar. If you guys want a delicious treat, whether it be halftime of game or after a workout or after a meal, Built Bar is the place to go. They've got the Built Go, the Built Boost, the Built Puffs, the Built Bars themselves. You guys can try them all at Built Bar right now. Go to BuiltBar.com. If you're looking for that delicious treat, but don't want to get all that fat and calories, you have to go and try Built Bar. They have just a whopping 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories, and 4 grams of sugar. You guys can also find them at Sam's Club. Look at that, Sam's Club. So you can buy them in bulk and buy those variety packs. Go to built.com today. It's built.com. Use the promo code LOCK15, LOCKED15, LOCK15 for 15% off today. All right, Chris, what do the folks want to know about the Horned Frogs besides they're scrappy?
Yeah, I think the key to me is, if you're a Georgia fan, what are you worried about? It's Max Duggan and that offense. How are they able to put up 50 points against a really good Michigan defense? And I guess start with up front. How good is that offensive line? How are they able to plug and play different running backs and still be effective back there? Because as we know, the SEC, you want to stop the run and run the ball effectively on the other team. But what's the biggest challenge up front for TCU or for Georgia in slowing down the TCU run attack and getting after Max Duggan?
Yes, I would say the one thing I felt like Michigan did was kind of underestimate TCU, but overestimate their advantage at that point of the game, because the entire game TCU was tougher on both lines of scrimmage, which I think is a reflection of not of how TCU is great. It's awesome, but TCU has been had at both lines of scrimmage before, this season. And so the fact that Michigan was not the tougher team, it was surprising, but the fact that they got pushed around. And look, this is an offensive line that, I think Georgia will not underestimate them. So I think it's a challenge for them this week. I think it's a big challenge for them this week on how are they going to block Georgia. And also, Georgia made a concerted effort last week to bring the heat and make Stroud uncomfortable, because he had been bad in those situations earlier in the season, and Michigan game in particular, right? So earlier, a couple weeks ago. And do they have to do that? Because this, Chris, generally speaking, they don't like to bring a ton of pressure. That's actually not a lot of the times what Kirby Smart defenses do. They've done a great job of using their speed, keeping everything in front of them, and executing from that standpoint. So I'm wondering what the pressure situation is going to be there. Max handles pressure pretty well, but if you're on him, you're on him. He's not Houdini. He's not Mike Vick. He's not one of those guys where it's like, oh my God, all the time. How the hell did he make this play? He's got good awareness. He can pick things up, but he actually is pretty good at knowing when to shut it down. If I had to take a sack, I'll take a sack. So I'm curious to see how Georgia, what they do in the pressure. If they say, okay, can we get 3 or 4 guys, 4 guys home? Originally could get 3 guys home originally. If not, do we start bringing stuff? So I'm curious there. I think the one big advantage they have is their skill players they play in the SEC. All of these guys would.
Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, Quentin Johnston. That's the one thing I think that scares me the most if you're a Georgia fan. We've seen elite wide receivers really take it to Keely Ringo, right? We saw Marvin Harrison last week. Was he on? Who was he checking in the LSU game? You'd know better than me.
Butte and Neighbors were both, they were both kind of getting theirs. But it's so funny. Prior to that game, I'd raved about Keely Ringo all year.
Right.
And so were these last 2 games anomalies? And to your point, if you're Georgia, do you maybe think about double teaming Quentin Johnston, bracket him, and take him away and force Max to throw it to somebody else?
Yeah, and that's the thing is, on the opposite side, Savion Williams didn't have a really nice game, but when defenses pay more attention to Johnston, like you're talking about, they'll find Savion Williams. Darius Davis has track speed. Serious track speed. He is the player, for those who don't know, who had the ball hit his chest and jump off it. This guy is a tremendous special teams player. Tay Barber, another real burner that they've got there, and also mentioned Savion Williams too. And then Hudson, the freshman they've had, he's played pretty well here, especially as of late. So they've got a variety of guys, not to mention Amari DiMercato, they've used in the passing game some, but came in to spell Kendre Miller, had over 100 yards rushing, right? The one thing that was big there was the fumble that he had, but everything else looked pretty good. So I would say the one thing people kind of keep missing out or not talking about here is this skill set, the skill group that they've got. It's diverse. They know that teams want to take away Quentin Johnston, and that's why Max will look for Savion Williams. Actually, before sometimes he looks for a Quentin Johnston. So that is one advantage that I think they have. And Georgia will be ready for all the guys, but they're going to make you cover all the guys, which you can't do on every single play, and especially modern college football with spacing.
The one thing I look at with Max Duggan all year long, he took care of the football. But most recently, he throws a pick in the Big 12 title game, and then 2 picks this past week against.
Yeah, neither of which were his fault. But yes,
sure.
He has been times. Yeah.
But I look at it as like if I'm looking at numbers and stats, like path to a victory for Georgia, I think if Max Duggan has 2 picks or more this week, Monday night, it's a Georgia win, right?
It's curtains. Yeah, that's TCU. And this is where I get frustrated. People saying Michigan choked the game away. TCU had 3 pretty bad turnovers. Like three. I mean, that ball hit Darius Davis squarely in the chest. You could have called holding or DPI on the first pick that he threw, and then DeMercado just turfed it. And Kendre Miller turfed the one where he got hurt too. So that could have been another turnover. It wasn't like TCU was taking excellent care of the football either. So I think for sure, TCU, one of the priorities has to be winning the turnover battle. You have to be a net positive in that category if you want to win the game. No doubt about that.
And it sounds like running back will be DeMercado again.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical Kendre Miller is going to be 100%. He was banged up going into like the last month or so of the season. I think people underrate how important it is established to run for this team. There have been times where they've Garrett Riley has completely forgotten about it, and then the second half starts and it's like run, and it's just they kill teams up front because they're not ready for it. So having Kendre as kind of the punisher, I don't think they're going to have that, and that's a huge loss for them. DeMercado is pretty good, but it's a bit thinner behind that. So it sounds like whatever they can get out of Kendre would be great. Maybe 10 to 15 carries, but I think we'll see a whole lot of DeMercado, and so I actually think that's going to make them pass the ball a bit more. He's actually pretty good in the passing game from what you see about the Tech game. Caught a really nice touchdown. Had used him all game. They used him all of a sudden, and he's not always great in pass protection. So I think it's something they're going to use more in the passing game. So I think TCU might just try to actually Big 12 this one. They might try to air it out a bit more, especially if Kendre, if he's not 100%.
We'll use this opportunity to thank you guys for making your first listen every day, either Locked On SEC or Locked On Big 12. And Josh, let's get into it. Our predictions for the game. How do we see this one playing out? The more and more I start to play it out in my head, Josh, I've followed the Georgia formula for much of this year. So many times they've gotten up on an opponent early, and I look at this almost as, man, if they go down and get points on the first couple of drives and they've got something like a 14-3 lead early, man, they're going to go to that 3-headed running attack. They're going to go to Kenny McIntosh, Jajon Edwards, Kendall Milton. They're going to bleed the game out. They're going to run that clock. They're going to keep coming at you, fighting for those first downs, wear down that TCU defensive front. And if that happens, if that's how it plays out, man, it just is a recipe disaster for TCU, because Georgia will keep coming at you and running the ball, and then Stetson Bennett choosing the spots. Keep in mind, they got that passing game going last week. Arian Smith having his breakout game as a Georgia Bulldog, over 100 yards and a touchdown. And then all the other guys, A.D. Mitchell and Kyrus Jackson and Rosemary Jackson, all these guys that, when they need a play to be made, they're there, and Stetson Bennett knows how to get them the ball. So that's kind of how I see this one playing out. If Georgia falls behind early, I'm not worried. I think Georgia has shown time and time again against Kent State, at Missouri earlier this year, and then this past weekend against Ohio State. They know how to come back. No deficit is too big for them, and they're not afraid to run the ball either. Hey, down double digits, we don't care. We're going to run the ball because that's what we do. And so I would say for TCU, it would be incumbent on them to take an early lead and put the pressure back on Georgia. If Georgia gets that early lead, man, that's what they love to do. Grind it out, run the ball, eat up clock. I've got Georgia doing that, and I've got Georgia winning 31-17.
Yeah, so it's very interesting because TCU, like, they love to get hit. Even if you saw it against Michigan, when they were up, they were like, hit us, please, hit us back. So they kind of thrive in that zone. The more I think about the matchup, though, it's so Georgia heavy, especially if Darnell Washington plays. 12 personnel really does well against 3-3-5s. Just because, all right, so who's like in 3-3-5, who's covering the linebacker or who's covering the tight ends? Excuse me. Like, you committed a lot of your linebackers last week to stopping the run. That's important, but also you got two tight ends you have to look out for. Darnell Washington, like when he catches the ball, man, he's a great blocker, but he's just throwing people off of him. So you have to mark him with somebody, right? And obviously, you have to mark Brock Bowers. I think the one kind of upsetting thing for TCU is like their advantage at corner with Hodges, Tomlinson, and Newton. It's good, but that's really not where Georgia made. Like on the outside, we saw it some last week, but this season, Chris, it's not really where they've made their money is the outside with the passing attack. So TCU is going to need to be creative with their corners by how they use them, maybe more effectively at times, just so they're not standing out there doing nothing all game, right? I mean, just as the guys who split out wide are just decoys. So I think that's a big advantage that we've yet to mention about this. I'm going to take TCU to cover. I think Georgia wins. I think TCU covers though, just because they play close games. Like they're so good at responding. Like whatever the adjustment has to be on the next drive, they always find it. Every single time they've had to find it at some point this year, they have found it. Whether it's the Kansas State game, the Texas game, they found it all game. Well, that game honestly should have been 17-3 in the end. The Baylor game, obviously, they found the adjustment. The Texas Tech game, they found the adjustment. West Virginia game, they found the adjustment. So this team lives in the we have to adjust mode. So I'm going to say Georgia 34, TCU 20, 27 maybe. And maybe it's a late score. It gets us to 27, but I think TCU does cover. I just don't really know what it looks like, but seeing TCU get blown out at this point, Chris, would frankly be odd. That's kind of how I feel at this point of the season.
And give me real quick your key matchup to watch just in terms of position on position. To me, I think it's the TCU linebackers. How, if they're big, bad, and physical, and they're coming through those gaps and slowing down. Look, all you can do is hope to slow down the Georgia run game. You're not going to shut it down, but, hold them to 2.5 yards a carry, 3 yards a carry, something like that, as opposed to if Georgia midway through this game is averaging 4.5, 5.5 yards per carry, that's danger territory for TCU. If I can fill those gaps and they're coming up and making those plays, I think the TCU linebackers are going to have to play a big role to slow down that Georgia run game and force some punts and get that ball back for the TCU offense.
Yeah, I want to see McClendon for Georgia up against Dylan Horton. Dylan Horton off the edge for TCU the last two games, Kansas State and then Michigan. He had 4 sacks against Michigan. He had 2 against K-State. He had 4 fumble against Michigan too. So if we're talking a 3-man front and you got a guy who's causing problems in a 3-man front, like that's a huge problem for your offensive line and for your offense. Does Horton look normal or like a guy that doesn't even exist? Or is he going to be the one-man wrecking crew on the edge he's been the last 2 games? Because if that goes TCU's way, Chris, you can throw out the window. This is a different football game. This is a completely different football game. If they have a guy in a 3-man rush that they're able to get home, they blitzed a lot last week, doing some different stuff. But it's still, if one of those edge guys like Horton gets home and he's a relentless guy, that changes the dynamic of the game. And because, like you mentioned, kind of the mismatch is kind of there, TCU is going to need somebody to change the dynamic of the game. The TCU front last week didn't have the game. They played well, but not the game of their lives. This is one of those weeks where it's like, it has to be the game of your life.
Yeah. And another guy I thought played really well last week on the left side of that line, Xavier Truss for Georgia. He was impressive. And I think some people even gave him, the offensive lineman player of the week, just saying,
right,
how good he was. And so, yeah, man, this is going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to see it. Don't believe the betting line. They put that out there, but we don't know how this thing plays out until we get out there. And it could be one of those we're sitting back going, how did TCU win it? Did TCU really just win a national championship? So I don't think we're saying that. We're both predicting Georgia, but that's what makes the college football season so fun is you never know. Any given day, anybody can upset anybody.
Yeah, and Chris, hey, I mean, I said that TCU was going to go under on the win total this year. I did not think they'd make a bowl game. That's where I was with TCU to start the season. So it's cool that we're here with this team, right? I mean, and also with Georgia too. Like people are saying, Stetson, why are you back? So it's like you might get people were worried he might get replaced during the season.
Yeah, and that's what makes us so fun. And really, had you asked me before the season, hey, pick a Big 12 team that could play in the national championship, I would have said Baylor, Texas, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, maybe with Venables. I mean, there were so many teams I would have run through before I got to TCU. So that's just a credit to Sonny Dykes and what a fantastic job he's done this year.
Yeah, and then we know Bryce Young is maybe the best quarterback Bama's had. They don't even make the playoff. Stetson Bennett's back again, so I'm fired up for it. Chris, where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
Yeah, Locked On SEC, talking all things SEC. And of course, we'll have 2 new members here very soon from the Big 12, Texas and Oklahoma coming over. So encourage anybody who loves the Big 12, but you might be a UT or a Sooner fan, come on over to our side, Locked On SEC.
Yeah, we can't wait to get them out, especially because they're not relevant anymore. So you can have them. You guys can find me on Twitter.
BYU, all right?
You guys can find us on Twitter at LO Big 12. You guys can find me at Josh Neighbors _. You guys can find the show wherever it's your podcast. You guys can find both Locked On SEC and Locked On Big 12 on YouTube and wherever you guys find your podcasts in case you can't catch the video version. Chris, let's see what happens, man. 1 game left of the season. Fired up for it. TCU and Georgia on Monday night.
Can't wait.